Ready? All right. Well, nice to virtually meet everyone. My name is Marc Gonzalez. I have been a resident of Plymouth, New Hampshire, on and off my entire life. Um, Came to Plymouth when I was really, really young. I think I was like 4 or 5, I think, if not younger. And my mom has been a professor at the university ever since. So I've had a really interesting sort of window into town life and the university's life, and particularly those places where they do meet and there's a lot of exchange. So I would say growing up from a like a kid's perspective, uh, I think that one of the things that I definitely felt growing up in Plymouth next to PSU was just sort of like a very acute awareness of the college students, particularly because of the demographics of New Hampshire, where there's usually pretty big gaps in age, uh, regardless of the town, but especially in rural areas, there's usually a pretty big age gap between kids aged like 0 to 18, and then adults 30 plus. There's usually kind of not a lot of people who are in that 18 to like 29 range. So when you're a kid growing up in Plymouth, you're very acutely aware of the presence of college students and sort of like where the college is and like what they do up there. It's kind of a little bit of a mystery, but also just a little bit of a wow factor when you're a kid. But that's not to say that there also wasn't some friction with the university, particularly university students, because as with any college town, there's always going to be that friction between college students who just want to like have the prototypical college experience, just have fun, go to class, blow off steam after class, like party, whatever. And it's like something that people in town are very aware of. We've developed a thick skin over the years, particularly where I live, which is actually on Pleasant Street. For those of you who are familiar with off-campus housing, we're one of the last families or residential housing on the street. Everyone else, or all of my other neighbors, and I did have neighbors at different points in time, but it's been very interesting to just sort of see, up and down the street, how eventually most people just don't want to deal with the parties and the noise and college students roaming the streets at night. And it's something that has it's an interesting sort of way to be introduced and meet college students. Spring fling was also a very big point of tension between the town and the university, uh, particularly because as a young student trying to get sleep on a night where college students are down to party till 4 or 5 in the morning makes things a little bit difficult. But those are the big examples of those points of friction, which are like a lot easier to point at because they're so memorable and recognizable. Like I remember all like 3 or 4 of the like 500 plus person parties that have like poured down my street, but there's many more times where it's just like a very quiet existence and a lot of good exchange happening between the town and the university. And one of those places where there was that sort of back and forth was definitely with extracurricular activities that college students both facilitated as a part of, like student organizations and groups that were on campus, but also with the groups that, faculty and students organized to bring students to campus, which I think was a very, very unique opportunity for myself and my friends to just sort of demystify the whole arena of college. because, you know, a lot of you may have felt this before you came to, you know, university, or you may not have, but, you know, like for a lot of younger folks, you know, university is kind of like a question mark. It's kind of, you know, like a mysterious place that everyone sort of talks about, like everyone knows what it is. But, you know, when you're younger, it's a little bit harder to place your finger on what it is, other than just, you know, more school for big kids. But when you actually go in there, and, you know, you get to see the level that university students are doing work at, and you get to see, you know, people who are not that much older than you but very much further along in their schooling, sort of essentially get to, you know, show off their stuff, and, you know, sort of show their chops. You know, if you were a group that was working with, you know, like kids and, you know, sort of a science program, there were a bunch of college students who used to do, you know, like outdoor exploration days. This was a ways back, but with students at Plymouth Elementary School when I was going there. And, you know, similar things like that. Like, I don't know if anyone is familiar with or has heard of the Educational Theater Collaborative, ETC, but that was also another huge point of contact for the community and college students, particularly in the theater program, but more generally because the auditions were open to both college students and the community. So you got a lot of, you know, student involvement on the campus side. You got a lot of, you know, groups of students coming from all over New Hampshire, really. You know, when I was doing ETC as a young whippersnapper, um, there were kids coming from as far away as, you know, like Concord and things like that, just to, you know, participate in these programs and, you know, come to PSU and like have that sort of exchange with the campus community. And then even, you know, a lot more informally, you know, my mom, as I said before, is a English professor. And so she, when we were a lot younger, she used to regularly, you know, use college students as babysitters as well, which is something that I know a lot of my peers who have grown up in Plymouth have also experienced. And, you know, like it's one of those things that it's hard to explain, those sort of informal relationships that you form. But I think that one of the things that PSU has done a really good job of in the past is creating spaces and venues for, you know, PSU students to not be a stranger to the community, and to, you know, really find ways to exercise their own interests in ways that involve the community, and, you know, like also, you know, further sort of support the learning that's going on here at PSU. So I don't know if there's any, you know, more pointed things that you want me to go into. You know, I have war stories about PSU parties that I've survived as a child. I have, you know, all sorts of knowledge, but I'm really an open book. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, or if there's anything that I brought up that people might want me to go further in detail on, or if everyone's just happy letting me continue rambling.
um, do you have any question? Anybody have any questions at this point? Would like to ask Mark?
What's one of your favorite memories growing up in Plymouth?
That's a good question. One of my favorite memories growing up in Plymouth. I think that, well, I definitely have, you know, different types of favorite memories, but I would say that some of my, you know, not to sort of cheat the question, but some of my favorite memories at or living in Plymouth and, you know, involving PSU have definitely been the relationships that I was able to form as a really young student. Because again, I think that it can't really be under or overstated enough how much of an impact, you know, having college students, you know, take an interest in younger students, how much that can really mean to younger folks. Whether it is as simple as, you know, like forming a relationship with, you know, like some of the college babysitters who I had, or some of the more structured things that occurred, you know, during ETC, or during, you know, young writers camps, which is something that has also occurred on this campus. But definitely, you know, not getting into like a single specific memory, but definitely being able to, you know, relate to and sort of humanize college students, I think have been some of my warmest memories that I look back on, because it sort of took a whole class of people, you know, that we talk about in like a big term, like we just say college students, or we say like freshmen, or we say sophomores or juniors, seniors, and we don't really, you know, like help especially younger folks understand like how diverse, you know, any one of those groups is, whether you're talking about, you know, incoming freshmen or you're talking about graduating seniors. You know, there's a lot of different college students, and getting to meet, you know, and compare and contrast, you know, really my different relationships with college students has helped me also, like moving forward, really sort of excuse me, take some of the, you know, the fear out of university, because, you know, it's also just one of those sort of big life goals that can be a little bit intimidating at first, but when you actually get to meet people who are there, or meet people who, you know, like are just, you know, they're funny, they're charismatic, you know, they're normal people just like you know, they're talking about sports, they're talking about, you know, like where they went to eat last night. You know, it's sort of that same experience of like what the first time you saw your, you know, elementary school teacher at the grocery store and you're like, wait, you don't live at school? You know, it's like you can't really fully conceptualize, you know, those these groups of people, you know, when we say college students, until you really take them out of that context, and you see that, you know, like when we say college students, we're really just talking about, you know, teacher name, we're just talking about Lauren, you know, and it's like, and I know Lauren. I may not know all college students, but I know Lauren. So when we're talking about college students, then that's the image that'll pop into my head. You know, it'll be, you know, it'll be Lauren, or to, you know, pick another name I see, it'll be Kyle, it'll be Jack, it'll be Olivia, you know. And when you take those sort of relationships out of this sort of like abstract, you know, just like broad terms that we use to describe people, it really makes the the whole idea of college much less daunting and much more, you know, attainable in, you know, young folks' eyes. At least speaking for myself, it definitely made college much less intimidating, and not in like a, you know, they did it, obviously I can do it sort of way, but more so like just people do this, you know, like someone who could have been my older brother is just going to college. And I understand that it's easier for, you know, a young person to wrap their head around that, as opposed to just like, okay, you graduated, now you go to college. That's sort of how it works. That can be a little bit hard for people to wrap their heads around. So I think my favorite moments have definitely been the ones where I've been able to form relationships, you know, personal relationships with the college students through the many programs, formal and informal, that have occurred on or around PSU.
Do, do you, how would you describe Plymouth as a community? Perhaps if you think about when you were growing up and now, but if I didn't know Plymouth, how would you describe it as a community?
Yeah, so Plymouth, I would say, is a really interesting community, particularly because of its proximity and, you know, its growth alongside and in parallel to the university. So I'd say the first thing to understand about Plymouth is that there's a big difference between sort of like the town core and the more rural areas that surround Plymouth. And it's sort of like, you know, two different worlds in a lot of respects, because a lot of people in town, a lot of the economy is, you know, directly tethered or tied or reliant on the university. So there's much more, you know, exchange going on. There's much more FaceTime happening, you know, between the university, faculty, staff, students, and the town. Whereas the further out you get, the less and less of an impact you sort of feel PSU have, and a lot less of, the way that the town is structured, a lot less of, the businesses that are available, a lot less sort of caters to the university. So in terms of the community, that creates like sort of pretty stark differences in terms of, who's where and what is where. So previously there used to be a lot more people who lived close to the city center, but the way that it's been going, it's become a lot less of a headache to simply sell the residential house that you do have. So say, you have a house on Pleasant Street, it's been a lot more financially viable for people to sell their home because of its proximity to campus and move away. So as the university has like grown to a certain degree, and some of the policies put out by the university change, then it's incentivized essentially a lot of people to leave. So there's really been an exodus of people from the sort of core of the city, or not the city, the town. That's how I'm from, from New Hampshire. I'm calling Plymouth. But just sort of changed the makeup. So like I said, like I used to have neighbors up and down my street, and it's all, white boxes of off-campus housing, walk to campus housing, Interlakes rentals, A+ rentals, like every type of rentals under the sun. And it's been sad to see to a certain degree, but it's also been like, pretty logical. Just like as the university's grown, it's more students need more places to stay, and with changes in policy, either there's been sort of a pendulum of like pushing people off campus, bringing people on campus, and that's one thing that I would say is that the biggest thing that I would impress upon people to sort of understand about the community is that there's a big difference between the center of town and the outskirts of town, because when you get out further from the center of town, that's actually where you start to see much more of actual Plymouth, many more of the people who come into town, who work in the shops, who work at the stores, who like have these businesses, who work at the restaurants, and they come in to sort of service the college economy, and then go back to their homes. So it's been interesting as one of the few remaining people who live sort of closer to the university, just to see how the community has sort of receded out from the town and sort of pushed outer to the more rural edges of the township.
Yeah, it is interesting that you say that, because not too long ago I realized how big Plymouth is. I actually thought that it was just the center of town that was Plymouth, and I just found out that it is, quite big, and it wasn't long ago. So it's interesting that you saying that. Anybody else would like to ask a question?
Did you go to PSU, or did you ever want to?
That is a very good question. So it was sort of a double-edged sword, my proximity to PSU, because, as I was mentioning before, it really sort of normalized college for me. It made it much more of like a fact of life, much more of a matter of fact thing, because, with my mom being a college professor and, like me as a kid coming on campus so much, to like, whether it was like grabbing a meal at the dining hall, or, like my mom grabbing us some, late night slices at the hub or something like that. We've been all over campus, and particularly for me, I knew that I couldn't sort of like make that transition to just sort of like going to high school in New Hampshire, and then especially going to PSU, which was, in walking distance to my house. It wouldn't have really felt like I was going to university, if that made sense. I would just feel like I was, rolling out of bed. And I think that that would have really hindered my ability to apply myself to my studies. There would have been a real temptation to just sort of phone it in, because I'd be like, I'm basically at home. What's the harm? But I definitely knew that university was something that I wanted to do. And, it was something that I had a great love for, just in an abstract sense, because of, how many memories and how much time I'd spent in a university space. But I think I came to the conclusion pretty early on that it couldn't be PSU. I applied to UNH and I got in, and there was a pretty solid internal debate going on where I was weighing the benefits of going to school in state and, sort of the financial reality of that with some of the other schools that I got into out of state, and my sort of desire to essentially just see more of the United States, and especially try and, like, live somewhere else in the United States, which is something that I hadn't done up to that point. I've lived internationally in different places, but I had never spent a solid amount of time in another place in the United States. So that was something that definitely factored into my decision. But yeah, I did end up going to Ithaca College in upstate New York for my undergraduate degree. I got my undergraduate degree in sociology, and I came back, and now I'm getting my graduate degree in English education at PSU. So I did come back, and I am going to school at PSU, but I did hold off till grad school so I could, like, at least tell people that I tried something else.